Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going over 10 more new infinite or instant win combos with Aetherdrift Part 2. If you haven't checked out Part 1, go check that out. But we got 10 more coming up, so let's jump right into it with Samut the Driving Force. This is a 6 mana 4/5. The most important line of text here is at the bottom. It says non-creature spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is your speed. Now, if you get up to max speed, that can be 4, so you can reduce the cost of your non-creature spells to less than 4. This card, Sprout Swarm, I believe this is legal and modern. It has 2 mana to make a 1/1 saproling, but it also has buyback for 3, and you can convoke it as well. So what you can do is if you have Samut out and you have max speed, so everything costs 4 less, you can play this for 1 mana to make a green saproling. Now it has convoke, so you can tap that saproling to play it again for 1 mana and buy it back, and then play it again for 1 mana and buy it back. Play it again for 1 mana and buy it back. So you just keep tapping all your saprolings to play it for 1 mana, and you make infinite saproling tokens. They would all be tapped, I suppose, because you're tapping to convoke them over and over again, but this is an infinite combo, 2-card combo, kind of. You do have to get up your speed, of course, to 4, which is, easily can be done before turn 6 or 7. But you could even tap the Samet to start the Sprout Swarm combo itself because it is a green creature as well. So, um, yeah, I think this has could be good in maybe Commander, but other than that, probably not a very competitive combo. Kind of cool and interesting to think about, though. All right, and next up is also a Samut combo in standard. I was thinking, is there a way to sort of use this ability to reduce the cost by 4 of anything in standard to make an infinite combo? And there kind of is. With Gilded Lotus and Drafna, you get an infinite number of artifacts entering the battlefield and leaving the battlefield, essentially. This is the only one I can think of in standard. Let me know if you can think of any other combos in standard that works with this, but if you reduce Gilded Lotus's cost to just 1 mana by reducing it to from 5 to 1, it then kind of nets 1 mana every time it comes into play, right? So if you use Drafna's ability to pay 2 to return it, you're paying 1, you're netting 2, using the 2 mana to return it, and then playing it again with the 1 mana you have left over. So you basically are even on mana here, but you're getting infinite come into play artifacts, abilities, or triggers, I should say. And the reason that's interesting is because there's the Pack Doll Terror, which says whenever this creature or another artifact you control enters, it drains your opponent for 1. So if you have all of these in play, you go infinite and can do infinite damage, assuming you have max speed. So a little janky or very janky, I would say. Probably not going to get this off in any sort of competitive queue, but maybe something fun to try out in a casual game. Okay, next up we've got the Cloudspire Coordinator. Interesting card that it's a 2 mana 3/1, but it taps to create X colorless pilot creature tokens, where X is the number of mounted vehicles that enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So the important thing is that it taps to create a token, but it doesn't cost any mana to do that. So this goes infinite with Intruder Alarm. Yes, we broke Intruder Alarm finally, right? um, but it is a very cheap way to do this, and because it also scries when it comes into play, it's kind of interesting that it can kind of set up your combo. And you could use a very cheap. There's some very cheap vehicles in this set too that you could use with it, or any sort of vehicle or mount creatures. There's some cheap mount creatures you could use as well to sort of just trigger the ability to tap to add a creature. And then if you have Intruder Alarm out whenever the creature comes to play, it untaps the Cloudspire Coordinator. So just keep tapping and creating infinite tokens, infinite pilot tokens in this case. So, very kind of cheap combo. Maybe this could be good in some older format commander. I'm not sure. But definitely has some interesting potential. All right. Next up, we got Silken Strength. I bet you didn't consider this an infinite combo piece, but it actually is a standard infinite combo piece. It's 2 mana for an aura, and you can attach it to a creature or vehicle, and when it enters, you untap the enchanted permanent, and the enchanted permanent gets +1/+2 and has reach. So this goes infinite with Geared, and any way to turn this into a token. Um, because Geared gives all your non-token creatures the ability to tap to create a copy of a token that entered the battlefield this turn. And as long as this is a token, it will untap the Geared again, or whatever creature you put it on, and they can tap to make another copy. It'll untap, tap to make another copy. So you just go infinite that way. Calyx, Guided by Fate, is one of the cheaper ways to make a copy of an enchantment. So you could potentially do this, play this on the Calyx attack and make a copy of it. Um, a token copy of it, and then keep tapping the Calyx for infinite Silken strengths. It would also give you infinite +1/+1 counters, because when enchantment comes into play, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So you get infinitely big Gearheads and infinitely big Calyxes with reach, and that could potentially win you the game. Fling it at your opponent, something like that. I don't know. Again, a bit janky, but kind of fun to think about this infinite combo in standard. Okay. Next up, we've got the Magmakin Artillerist, which is a 3-mana 1/4. It says whenever you discard one or more cards, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent. Now, this goes infinite with Curiosity, or there's a lot of other effects like Curiosity that says whenever a creature does damage, you draw a card. Uh, and you could use these two cards in conjunction with a discard outlet. However, you can also do this if you just have 8 cards in your hand and you go to your end step. Because what happens during your end step is that there's like a cleanup phase that says you have 7 or more cards in your hand, you have to discard, or 8 or more cards, you have to discard down to 7. So if you have 8 cards in hand, you have to discard, which will trigger the artillerist to do 1 damage to your opponent. Then Curiosity will make you draw a card. However, in the end step, it still checks if you have 8 or more cards, and so you have to discard again, do another damage, draw another card, and you're basically using the end step with 8 or more cards as your discard outlet. Now, again, if you have another discard outlet that's free, that could also just do that no matter how many cards you have in hand, as long as you have that many cards in your library, so you don't deck out. But this would probably do enough damage to basically kill your opponent. Um, it's not necessarily infinite damage. It's as much damage as cards in your deck, but this loop repeats infinitely. So, some interesting combo here to potentially think about. Um, Also, in standard, I was thinking, is it possible to get this to go off in standard? Yeah, kind of. If you have, so again, this is more realistic using uh, discard outlet, the Guardians of New Benalia. Um, but again, you could do this if you just had 8 cards in your hand and the artillerist and the Mizzet in play. The Mizzet says whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards. So then, if you have all 3 of these in play, you can use the Guardian to discard a card, ping your opponent for 1. Nib Mizzet will have you draw a card, and then you discard that card, ping your opponent for 1, draw a card, etc., etc., etc. So, um, kind of janky again. These cards are all quite expensive. Um, the total mana cost is what, 6, 9, 11, 3-card combo, but maybe some fun uh, kitchen table magic combo if you want to try to pull this off. All right. Next up, we've got an infinite turns combo with the Medican Core Guide Light. That's a 2-mana star 3. It has start your engines, and most importantly, the bottom part says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you can pay 1. If you do, copy it. So this can go infinite with Uggin's Nexus. I believe this is Pioneer legal. Uggin's Nexus says if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips the turn instead. And if it would be put into a graveyard in the battlefield, instead exile it and take an extra turn after this one. So the trick here is that you want to get up to max speed and then have a way to copy the Uggin's Nexus using the last ability. And you also need a way to bounce it every turn. So if you have Uggin's Nexus and you copy it with the Medican Core's ability on the stack, it'll create a copy, legend rule, and then you destroy the copy of it, so that'll trigger, you'll get an extra turn after this one. However, you have to find a way to bounce the Nexus so that the extra turn, if a player will begin an extra turn that skips that turn instead, is no longer in play. So you bounce it with Meticulous Excavation, or you could, again, bounce it with Drafna. Um, and then during your extra turn, you just play it again, copy it again, get an extra turn, bounce it, This is a lot of mana. Again, kind of janky perhaps, but something fun to think about. All right. We've got another Boommobile combo. I keep thinking of different combos with this card. This card is, in my first video, part one, um, I talked to a few different Boommobile infinite combos. This is another one in standard that could work potentially with Elishnorn and then Urza. So, you know what Boommobile does? It's a 4 mana this new vehicle. When it enters, you add 4 mana of any one color, and you spend it only to add activated abilities, and then you can exhaust it to basically fireball your opponent or any target. Um, with Urza, you can pay 6 mana to create a copy of it. So 4 of the mana could be used for Urza. Now, if you double the Boommobile's come into play ability, it will create 8 mana when it comes into play, right? So if you have Elish Norn out, it triggers an additional time. So you play Boommobile, it'll give you 8 mana. 6 of it you can use with Urza to create another copy of the Boommobile. Comes into play, makes 8 mana, use 6 to make a copy. So now you're netting 2 mana on each time you're doing this. And then once you have enough mana, infinite mana, however much you want, you can use the exhaust ability to kill your opponent. So there's another infinite combo in standard. Again, expensive pieces, a bit janky, but might be fun to try to pull off in a casual game. Okay, next up we've got a Cryptcaller Chariot combo. Again, in part one, I talked about another one of these combos, a much simpler one in as Pioneer legal. But in standard, I was trying to think of, is there a way to kind of go infinite with this? And there is, actually. So Cryptcaller's Chariot, 4 mana for a vehicle, says whenever you discard one or more cards, create that many tap 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Now, you have to have Encroaching Mycosynth, which turns everything into an artifact. So those tokens, the zombie tokens, would be an artifact. And then the Transplant Theorist says whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you can draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So once a token comes into play, or if you have the Mycosynth, the Chariot, and then you play the Transplant Theorist, it'll trigger, draw a card, discard a card, make a zombie, which is now an artifact zombie. That'll trigger the Theorist, draw, discard, make another zombie, trigger the Theorist, draw, discard, make another zombie, trigger the Theorist. So you can basically you can dig through your entire deck, basically loot through your whole deck. So you have to stomp at some point. Otherwise, you're just going to deck yourself. But you can make a lot of zombie tokens. They are all tapped, sadly. So you can't like block with them a turn, but you could probably swing for lethal the next turn. Or if you had anything that sort of drains your opponent when a creature comes into play or an artifact comes into play, like that card we talked about before, that could do infinite damage on the spot. So again, kind of janky, very expensive pieces here, but could be fun to pull off in a casual game here. Okay. And last up, we've got the Dredger's Insight. So this one I actually think has some competitive chance. It's a modern combo here with Yawgmoth, and that's already like an established deck in modern. That's pretty decent. From what I understand, I don't play a ton of modern, but it seems like it's a pretty tier deck there. And using Dredger's Insight, which says whenever one or more artifacts enter creature cards, leave your graveyard, you gain 1 life. It comes into play, you mill 4, and then you can put an artifact, creature, or land card from among the mill cards into your hand. So the life gain here is important because it offsets the life loss from Yawgmoth, which says to pay 1 life to sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter on another target creature, and draw a card. Now, if you're not familiar with this, if you have 2 creatures with Undying, say 2 young wolves, you can infinitely sacrifice 1, and 1 would come back with a -1/-1 counter on it. Or sorry, a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can use the -1/-1 counter to offset the +1/+1 counter so that it'll come back again. And you can kind of keep looping between the 2 young wolves, sacrificing and targeting them, the other one, to draw infinite cards. Now, this was previously kind of bound by the life how much life you had. But if you have the Dredger's Insight, then you don't have to worry about the life loss from Yawgmoth because you'll be gaining a life every time a young wolf goes to the graveyard and comes back from the Undying effect. So perhaps this card would go in that deck, and this is a way to set up an infinite card draw. Of course, you don't want to draw your entire deck; you just lose. But you could draw most of your deck and probably win from there. So it also is nice that it sets up the combo because it can kind of search for any of these pieces, which is useful as well. So perhaps we'll see that coming into Modern for that combo as well. So I believe that is it for these 10 new infinite or instant win combos. Let me know in the comments below what you think about them. Any cool, interesting combos that you can think of using Aetherdrift in Standard or any other format. Love to hear about cool combo ideas. I just think it's fun to think about these and try to pull them off. That's what I try to do on this channel as well. So if you're interested in seeing some new Aetherdrift brews coming out soon, as soon as it's legal on Arena, I'll be playing with a bunch and brewing a bunch of new combo decks. I mostly brew standard combos. So yeah, stick to the channel for that. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.